of these countries have in common. They have unending violence, instability, and civilian casualties in common within all these countries. But this is really where side proposition stands out in today's debate. Because side proposition, we come up with an affirmative action to make the situation better, to make the catastrophe in these countries better. And this is why you should stand with side proposition. Because side proposition today, in the long term, wants to save lives, has an affirmative action to save lives. And this is why we're so proud to propose the motion, this House would grant autonomous regions to armed insurgencies in exchange for peace. So what do we mean by autonomous regions? An autonomous region is a subdivision of a country that has a degree of self-governance under the central government. What do we mean by armed insurgencies? Armed insurgencies are an organized resistance group that uses armed conflict to achieve its aims. The main aims of armed insurgencies is to overthrow the current administration of the country and to reallocate power within the country. Now, so 2 points of clarification side proposition needs to make in today's debate. Firstly, we need to make it very clear that there is a huge difference between armed insurgencies and terrorists. There is a clear demarcation. Armed insurgencies are groups that oppose the government, that want to oppose the government and have an inherent following of people who identify themselves with the ideology of these armed insurgencies. But on the other hand, what are terrorists? Terrorists, you inculcate fear and terror into the lives, into people's hearts to force their ideology over the people. We see there is a clear difference between armed insurgencies and terrorists. But the second point of clarification we need to make in today's debate is that the motion talks about this House would grant autonomous regions. So today's debate takes place in a situation where these armed insurgencies have come up to the negotiation table and are agreeing with the terms and conditions. We believe this is the world where these armed insurgencies come forth for negotiations. And now let me first go on with our policy. So now, ladies and gentlemen, what is our policy? What do we have to? What is our measures to ensure that the motion goes ahead? Today, we believe that the government will propose terms in direct negotiations with these armed insurgencies. And the terms of these armed insurgencies are going to be a permanent ceasefire of both the parties. Secondly, these autonomous regions, autonomous regions will be federal units under the government, which will be operating under the government and will have some sort of dependence over the central government. And thirdly, there will be a freedom of movement for these citizens. So people who identify themselves with the ideology of these armed insurgencies can move to that autonomous region, and people living in that autonomous region who disagree with these armed insurgencies can move out from the region. So there has to be, thank you sir, a freedom of movement for the regional citizens. Now what is our stance on side proposition? On side proposition, we tell you that our solution is the most effective solution for achieving long-term stability and peace. And in order to win today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, we need to prove to you how we are effective in ending the conflict in these countries. We are effective at making the situation better, and the second thing we have to prove to you is how there is an obligation of the government to ensure right to security and right to life for the people of the country. So moving on to my first argument, which is the obligation of the government to ensure peace, and I'll also be talking to you about the effectiveness of our model in ensuring peace. My second speaker today will be talking to you about the moderation of these insurgents. So moving on to my first argument, which is obligation of the government to ensure the right to life of these people. So now we need to understand that for any state in order to establish itself as an efficient institution, in order to establish itself as a strong institution that protects its people, we believe that the government needs to have a monopoly over violence. The monopoly over violence is basically that only the government is justified to use violence to safeguard its people, and no other party is legitimate in using violence against people. But then we also have this this point of closure versus right to security and life. Now, firstly, we see that we consider the fact that these armed insurgencies have caused a lot of have taken up a lot of have done a lot of stuff, a lot of killings in the country, a lot of civilian casualties have been there in order to oppose the authority. Although we need to see is that these unforgivable sins need to be ignored. We need to understand the fact that the people of these countries, they prioritize right to life and right to security over closure. To explain this to you, we have an analogy. We can tell you that a rape victim would not want to have revenge over the person, over the rapist, but the rape victim would want other women to not go through the same fate. So what we're seeing is that these people want to ensure security, want to ensure peace for themselves, and in the long run, we tell you that these people don't want closure they don't want revenge against these armed insurgencies. We believe this is what the people want. We believe the principle on our side is that it is the obligation of the government to ensure this, the obligation of the government to hear what the people want. That is right to life and security. But moving on to my second argument, which is the effectiveness of our model in ensuring peace. We tell you that the status quo today, the policies of the status quo are very flawed. In the status quo, we see that these armed insurgencies are being battled by the government. The government wants to eradicate these armed insurgencies. But we need to understand that ideologies cannot be destroyed. There will still be people who will come up after an insurgency is destroyed to carry out their own insurgency. We give you the example of Taliban. In Taliban, we've seen that in the past 18 years, there have been 30,000 civilian casualties. There have been 111,000 deaths of soldiers. But guess what? Taliban is still there. This is what's flawed with the status quo. Although our motion, what it tries to do is that it tries to attack the root cause. And the root cause is that we need to give this underrepresented minority a place to emphasize their own autonomy. We believe when you give them autonomy, we get peace in return. That is what our principle is, and that is why we are so proud to propose this type of position.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, judges, team proposition, team opposition. So I'd like to start off by saying that the exchange of land for peace is not viable. Land is solid, concrete, and guaranteed. Peace is not. So I, as first speaker, will be first speaker of team opposition. First off, I'll be defining the motion. So our team, for the most part, agree with team proposition's definition. However, we'd like to add on to that definition by saying that they did not define peace, and we define peace as end to violence, as well as social rest and social cohesion. So I, as first speaker, will be talking about the legitimization of insurgency groups, repercussions of insurgency groups, and rebutting some points made by the first speaker of team proposition. My second speaker will be talking about long-term peace, why exchange of land for peace is just simply unfair, and providing more rebuttals. And lastly, my third speaker will be providing a summary and rebutting any points made in today's debate. So first of all, I'd like to rebut some points made by their first speaker. He started off by saying that there is a clear distinction between armed insurgencies and terrorist groups. However, and he said that insurgency groups only attack the government. However, he further went on to later in his speech, he directly contradicted himself by saying that armed insurgencies cause civilian casualties. So clearly, there's a flaw in their definition. They said that armed insurgencies are clearly different from terrorists later, but there are clear similarities. And I'd like to also say that insurgencies can often turn into strict terrorist groups. So let's look at the example of the Taliban, which was originally established as an insurgency by the US government to resist Soviet expansion into Afghanistan. However, it quickly realized its leeway and became a terrorist organization. And second, another rebuttal I'd like to make is that in their model, they said that people in the autonomous region, people who do not like the insurgency groups coming into their land, they can simply leave. This is not how it works. Do you possibly think that these insurgency groups will just simply let these people leave? And in addition to that, you can't just simply kick people out of their own land. These people are living in this land, and you can't just come into their land and say, oh, wow, this is ours now. And now I'd like to move on to my substantive. We should not legitimize insurgency groups by negotiating or considering their interests. So one thing we can all agree on is that in all of its forms, violence is clearly a horrid act. Insurgencies are bound by no official laws, and they fight with passion and are quickly they're quick and unhesitant to resort to violence as a method of getting what they want. So negotiations in exchange for peace are therefore only an act of submission to terror, war, and ruin that insurgencies bring about. So by giving them land, what we're establishing their means of leverage, which is violence as a worthy tool against us. Not only does this paint us as a supporter of violence, this also puts the international scene at stake. The perspective reports that terrorists are criminals, period. The tactics used by terrorist organizations are organized crime families, particularly drug cartels, and this is basically interchangeable. Murder, extortion, kidnapping, drug trafficking, rape, and the innumerable other perversions committed by these insurgency groups are unforgivable. Just as we would not negotiate with John Gotti or El Chapo over the nature of their crimes, we should not negotiate with these insurgency groups for what they want. Now I'll be moving on to my second point, which is that land governed by an insurgency is bound to be failure, which will inevitably lead to more violence, not peace. So the main mode of operation of an insurgency group is violence and militia warfare. Insurgency groups are unorganized and lack a governing body. So how can it be expected that they follow their promises of any type of peace? It's as unrealistic as giving a child a gun and hoping they will be responsible with it. It is the government's duty, it is their responsibility to hold these insurgencies accountable for their crimes. And I'd like to add on to that by saying, what will happen to the people that live on this land? Surely it is irrational to think that everyone on a given piece of land supports that insurgency. So what will be of them? Undoubtedly, an insurgency will not stand by while enemies in the land live within its borders. And as an example, I'd like to cite the example of South Sudan, which had a failure of insurgencies to establish its government. When it broke out from Sudan, South Sudan was in turmoil as no government body was successfully made, and at the same time, tribal warfare and inherently existing violent mindset tore the nation apart. So clearly, insurgent groups are very harmful to a land. Thank you.
So as a proposition, we should make one thing over here clear, right? Because we're talking about a situation where people are dying every day. People are taking up arms to actively try and destroy the current government, right? They're undermining its legitimacy in all forms and putting millions of civilians at risk, preventing them from having basic necessities such as food on the table and water to feed their thirst, right? So in such a case, team opposition needs to tell us why it's okay to delay this and make the conflict go on for even longer, right? Because what we in the US proposition is that it is necessary for team opposition to tell us and to justify why it is okay to make the conflict to go on for a longer time, thus endangering the lives of people and taking the rights of millions of civilians away, right? Because that is the burden on side opposition. Because we believe it is never okay, it is never possible to justify taking away the basic rights of millions of civilians. And that is why it is necessary to take a step that can give you immediate results, and its effects are long-lasting as well. So what am I going to make clear in my speech, right? So first, it is necessary to understand that today's debate needs to be understood as a form of comparison, right? How are we making things better, and how our model is the best for making things better in the status quo? So we tell you that more often than not, governments try to completely eradicate such forms of insurgencies by continuously carrying out military operations that spans decades, right? And most of the times they're not even successful and they're not able to do so. And what happens in such case, right? The government often runs out of resources and is not able to feed its own people because they prioritize wiping out insurgencies, right? Because in such a case, it is necessary to understand that some form of concession needs to be made in order to maintain stability in the region, right? So when team opposition comes up and tells us that it is never okay to enter into any form of negotiations because violence is always absolutely wrong, we don't buy that, right? Because then team opposition also needs to say that it's never okay to let your own person die, right? A government has the obligation to protect its own citizen and prevent the civilian from being killed, right? Due to the nature of war itself, right? There are a lot of people who die due to collateral, right? So we believe that team opposition needs to engage with us on these grounds. So on to the rebuttal, right? So when we make a distinction between terrorists and insurgencies, they tell us that it is not the same, it is the same essentially because civilians die. But civilians die in each and every war, right? Because even when the US government carries out military intervention in Afghanistan and they use drones, a lot of civilians are killed as well. So are they saying that, governments are also illegitimate and they cannot use violence? Because civilians die every time conflict takes place. This is exactly why we're saying that these conflicts need to be stopped. No matter who is using violence, for whatever reason, civilians are the ones who are always hurt because they are not able to protect themselves and they don't have enough resources to protect themselves and ensure that they can lead a stable life and have any form of development in their life, right? So I believe team opposition needs to understand who is the most vulnerable stakeholder in today's debate. That is civilians, and team opposition does absolutely nothing to make things better, right? So I believe it is important to understand how we make things better on our side, which is what I'll be talking about further in my substantive. So then on to the idea, of how it's always wrong to engage with them because they're violent. Because then we ask them, like, is it wrong to have a ceasefire to protect your own people? Because often governments try to enter into a ceasefire with the opposing party so that they can give food and other basic necessities to their own civilians, right? Who are dying due to the problems, due to the war, right? They're not able to get basic medical necessity. So I say that even such ceasefires are not justified because you never ever negotiate with insurgencies. We believe that this is deeply flawed and it is the obligation of a government to take care of its citizens, and that is the basic obligation that a government needs to fulfill before moving on to other principal justifications of the actions of a government. Yes.
If you met the requirements of the insurgency once, what motivation is there for the insurgencies to stop killing?
So regarding stability, I will be talking about that in my substantive, right? So one of the last point of rebuttal, that is the lack of governing body, right? The fact that this is not at all true, right? Because insurgent bodies have a lot of organization, which is the reason why they're able to inflict so much damage on a government, which is always an organized body, right? Insurgencies often have a leader, even if all of them do not agree with each other. So we see that in the case of the Chechenian conflict, Ramzan Khrushchev was the leader of the conflict, and he was able to enter into negotiations with the government, right? So I believe it's just simply wrong to say that they don't have a leader and they're just running around with guns and killing people. I believe it is more than that, right? It is an ideology and it is often organized and has a specific goal in mind, right? So team propaganda tells us how the government also in return is able to take an organized approach and an organized response to this movement, which is threatening so many lives. So what is my substantive today, right? So I'm going to be talking about the moderation of insurgencies and how exactly is it that we get what we want, right? Because we need to understand that insurgencies are different from terrorists because of the fact terrorists are less hesitant to inflict more damage on the civilians, right? They often use civilians to get more leverage over the government, but we don't see insurgents doing so. Why, right? Because insurgents often depend on the support of their own community in order to get sympathy and have some form of support and some form of standing within a conflict, right? So we tell you that especially in most cases, it is a minority community that these insurgents are standing for, right? Even in the case of Bangsamoro in Philippines, they stand for the Muslims of the Philippines, which is a small community. And the main reason why this insurgency has come up in the first place is because the government was insensitive to the demands and the identity of this entire community, right? So we believe that such a movement can only be strong and can only be powerful only when they appeal to its own people, right? Because because it is a small community. So if they don't have the support of that small community, at least it means that they will not be able to carry out their goal successfully. So why do we make things better, right? Because when we give negotiations, when we put negotiations on the table and we tell you that you're going to get an autonomous region, they can carry out and exercise their identity fully. So essentially that goal is met. So what does that mean, right? If we as a government are willing to give them what they want, it means that violence becomes increasingly unjustified. And as we've been trying to tell you, civilians are affected by this, violence, and if these insurgencies continue to use violence, it means that the civilians simply stop supporting them because they see how this violence becomes increasingly unjustified, right? So in such a case, it is necessary for the insurgent groups to listen to these negotiations, enter these negotiations, and moderate themselves in their approach in terms of dealing with the government, right? Because otherwise, they alienate the entire support base, and they alienate the civilians who they're working for and whose support they need so much, right? So we believe this is the way in which we will be able to ensure that there is some form of moderation. But even so, what in future, what is the guarantee that we have, right? We tell you that when we recognize this body and give them some form of legitimacy, we make that, we make it clear that we make it more accountable, because the fact that when they become a legitimate form of government and they depend on other bodies, such as the UN and even their own central government, it makes them more easier to put pressure on them, right? In terms of political pressure, international pressure on them through methods that are more constructive, not violence, but instead using political statements and political weapons against them. So I believe this is the way in which we bring a solution to them that attacks the root cause, attacks the problems that these communities are facing, and thus guarantees long-term peace and stability. Thank you.
Good morning, team opposition, team proposition, respected judges, audience. So I'm the second speaker for the team opposition, and today I'm going to be refuting and rebutting the points made by the first and second speakers of team proposition, and also giving you two more of our substantives. All right, so let's get into it. So first of all, there was from the start we heard that these insurgencies are violent. Okay, people who are violent tend to have volatile instances where they do not think with ration. They do not act like a normal civilized human being would. Why would we ever get into any kind of conversation with someone with this type of mentality? This type of mentality where if I don't bring a gun, I can't get what I want. And if we give them what they want, they'll remember. They'll remember. I bought a gun last time. He gave me what I wanted. So why wouldn't I bring the gun again? It's that simple. It's human psychology. All right. So next of all, I want to point to the fact that there was an obvious contradiction in the definition. So they said that insurgencies only go against the government, but then the speaker went on to say that indirectly or directly it causes civilian harm, which is just absurd. They're just two contradictory points. Then they came and presented us with their model. Their model is so flawed that it's just not possible to enact. Because he said that if the people living there do not like it, they can simply just leave. Are you serious? These people might have been living here with families for thousands of years, and you're just telling them to uproot their lives because some guy came in with a gun and told them to leave? What kind of message is it sending to the people? Is it sending a message to the people that we protect them? Is it because Team Proposition seems to think that the government is for the people, and it is. All right, but if you tell these people to leave because some guy came into their land with a gun and they left, what will they think of you as a government? Please.
We're not forcing people to go, but we're giving them the freedom to go if they wish to. So we're not restricting them, but we're giving them more freedom.
All right, that's just as bad, because the insurgency groups will obviously not want these people in their land, especially if these people would want to leave in the first place. This is just a recipe for disaster of a model. Another thing he said was some form of absolute concession must be done. Okay. A concession to whom? A concession to a violent terrorist organization? That is unacceptable. We do not. The world, for the longest time, has not submitted to terror, and it won't start today. They have given no evidence that any of what they said will actually help in stopping these insurgency groups or these terrorist actions. And yeah. So one other thing he said is that team opposition would have us do absolutely nothing. Well, allow me to remind you that we are team opposition and we are going against this motion, and it is not our burden to give you a solution, but to criticize this one as it would not work. But since you asked so nicely, I'll give you a model. So one of it is that, first of all, better engagement on international laws on arms trade, because someone is supplying these insurgencies with weapons that cause unstable land. Another one is engagement in diplomatic activities to near international coalitions against these groups. international consensus against these insurgencies. All right, thank you. That was for my rebuttals. We'll get to my arguments now. So this will not ensure long-term peace. All right. So these insurgency groups are not bound by any laws. They are volatile and extension and become very dangerous. Peace isn't just about stopping violence. Social cohesion and acceptance plays a part in it. These people that are governing, these insurgency groups are going to be governing people. Do the people want to be governed by them? That's a real question you have to ask here. Because if not, then it will create a positive feedback loop. A positive feedback loop is when a change enhances or amplifies the system. This tends to move the system away from its equilibrium state and makes it more unstable. So this will cause social unrest, basically. That will most likely be the cause of allotting land to individuals who aim to take it by force and have no stable funding, governing experience, or any type of leadership. And this will cause more resistance, more violence, and new insurgencies. This does not help at all. It is not the correct course of action. I cannot stress this enough. So there's land, onto my second argument. Land governed by an insurgency is, thank you, please.
Does this people realize that these insurgencies already control large amounts of land and they're already responsible for the livelihood of millions of people?
Thank you. So basically, the government granting it to them is not the same as them controlling it. Because when you grant someone a piece of land, that means you recognize that they have that piece of land. All right, and when you like go in a land with a gun and say it's mine, that's an act of aggression. That's an act of war. All right. So land governed by insurgency is bound to be a failure, leading to more violence and not peace. Insurgencies are unorganized and lack a governing body. All right. They can not follow any of their promises if they don't want to. They don't have any moral obligation to do what you tell them to do. He said that when the second speaker of Team Proposition said that when you get what you want, your incentive to stop killing, to end violence, there will be an incentive to end violence when you get what you want. Well, that's just not true because these insurgency groups are not bound by the same laws you and I are bound by. They don't have speed limits that say 30 kilometers per hour. There's no one to tell them what to follow. They follow what they want. They do what they want. They go where they want, and no, there's absolutely no oversight, no justification. And they have no one to answer to. All right. And next, I'll be explaining a simple psychological occurrence. So it's called the hedonic treadmill. Humans quickly return to a stable level of satisfaction, which encourages them to want more. In the context of the land, after the land is given to these insurgency groups, chances are they'll want more. This is basic human tendency, proved by psychological studies. They'll certainly want more and will resort to violence to get it. Next, I would like to talk about the Jewish insurgency in mandatory Palestine involved paramilitary action to carry out the Jewish state. So basically, there was insurgencies in when the land was back in 1949 when the land was in power of Palestine. All right, these insurgencies sprung up. They were Jewish insurgencies which carried out many high-level assassinations. All right, so. What happened? The British ended up giving these insurgencies the land. And what do we see today? Look what happened today. Look at that area today. This happened 50 years ago, and look at that area today. You see, when something like this happens, when you grant them land, and that land isn't yours, and you don't know the people who are sitting on that land do not want to be governed by these people, this type of insanity happens. Where you see today, we have a world more divided than ever because of this particular situation.
We please ask the audience to stay quiet during the speeches, and now we call on the third speaker of proposition to come and wrap up their case.
The opposition told us today. The opposition told us today that our model does not stand, that our model is not practical, that our model will never actually lead to any benefit for the people of these regions. But they have been giving history lesson, ladies and gentlemen. The Irish Republican Army against the British Army in 1950. They were in insurgency against the United Kingdom government. But what happened here? They entered negotiations within the United Kingdom, and now we have the existence of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Northern Ireland is one of the biggest economies within Europe and within the world. So what we are witnessing today is opposition is not actually looking into facts and looking into examples of situations where this has actually worked. Another example is in Chechnya and Russia. This is the autonomous region in Russia that had a supply of oil resources, and now they're able to develop it. That is in the benefit of both the people and the Russian government itself. Because now we see that the granting of the autonomous region to the likes of these people actually work. And now we do not understand what the opposition is actually talking about when they say that this is not feasible, this is non-practical. Now in today's day we face three major questions. Which scenario is actually better for the people of these regions? The second question being, is the compromise actually worth it? And the third clash is between insurgencies and terrorism. Moving to the first flashpoint. No, thank you, sir. Moving to the first flashpoint, which scenario is actually better for the people? Now we've told you that it's the obligation of people to look after its citizens, to give them a promise of peace, give them a promise of security. What we have received from the opposition is that is clashes against our model. The question is as to how people will be allowed to move out of these regions and are not allowed to leave. Well, ladies and gentlemen, under our model, it clearly specifies that these negotiations will be compromised by both parties, and this is just one of the compromises that these insurgents will have to undergo. The other argument the opposition have brought up is that people will not agree to their homes being snatched away. But what homes are we actually talking about? These regions are war-torn societies with actually no, they cannot afford their own food, they cannot afford their own water, they cannot afford to give their sons and daughters a future. So which kind of homes are we talking about? What proposition believe is that these people will actually be glad to move out of these homes. They'll be actually glad to move. Out of these homes into regions where the government provides, because now they know that the government will provide the security, provide them a sense of living, provide them a quality of life. So we don't realize what the opposition is actually talking about when they say that these people will not actually agree to come out. Because we, as the opposition is looking at this, we are providing these people a better life, a better society, a better argument to move into the regions controlled by the government. We believe that we are clearly on this flashpoint, as we believe we are working for the betterment of the people, while they are only talking about why these people will not agree to the compromises that the government has actually worked with. Now, moving to the second flashpoint, which is the compromise that we are proposing, the autonomous regions. Are these actually worth it? What we have told you is that today's compromise is actually attacking the root cause, because as we believe, the origin of these insurgencies is that they're representing the ideologies of the minority, they're representing the causes of the minority that was oppressed by the government, that was oppressed by the majority, and that is why they have taken up arms. But what they have exactly received from the opposition? Well, they have told us that land in exchange for peace is not actually worth it. Then what is worth it, ladies and gentlemen? 10 years of peace, what else can we give? What else is the opposition offering to give to them? They have no thanks, sir. They've provided no explanations as to why they believe that land is actually not worth it. Land is actually not a better alternative. They've themselves given no alternatives. So they've said that today's motion is a support for violence, and that violence is now justified. Well, then what is justified? The current scenario where we have both parties at a stalemate and there is no compromise being seen, that people are dying on both the sides with no compromise, and people the ones that are actually suffering are the people living in these regions. What we are promising these people is a hope for a better tomorrow, a hope for a better lives in the coming future. Well, they've also told us what we received with the opposition is that negotiating with these insurgencies is actually morally not viable. And then what is viable? Negotiations are the only way to solve every conflict, whether it's with insurgencies or with governments. We believe that negotiations are the only way to solve any conflict, and that applies to each and every scenario. So why is the opposition telling us that the proposition we are proposing is an end to this conflict with negotiations? So we believe that the opposition have not given a better scenario, and is not telling us why our solution is actually bad. But they've also told us that compromises cannot be accepted. Then why compromises cannot be accepted? These conflicts have been going on for tens of decades. Well, what we are promising today's debate is that this conflict will not go on for another 10 years. So what is the problem with that? The opposition cannot provide us guarantee that this conflict will be solved by the government in the years to come. What we are promising is that a compromise on both sides and the direct end to conflict. So where is the problem that the opposition has with today's motion? This is where we are still expecting a reply from the opposition side. One of the third flashpoint, we've told you that establishment of this autonomous region will allow these insurgencies to practice their own ideologies, to practice their own beliefs within these regions, along with the people that support them. So where is the problem? the team opposition has. Another clash country is between the insurgency and terrorism. The team opposition have told us is that, well, terrorism is unlikely, kind of similar to insurgency. Well, they are not equal. What they have failed to realize is that terrorism is not for the public cause, even for a minority. But they have told us that these groups lack the leadership and political framework to actually lead our government. Well, they have forgotten that existing insurgencies already have the system of branching of leadership. That is why they are just practicing. They can carry out operations, and that is why they have public support even of a minority. So where is the problem the team opposition has when we give these insurgency groups a leadership framework to govern themselves, to govern their own people, and to practice the ideologies that they believe in. They've also told us that these non-volatile, they call this brought up the non-volatile mentality of these insurgencies and portray them in a manner that they are kids, violent kids with no proper mental framework, and that they'll promote violence at every opportunity they get. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they fail to realize is that in today's debate, we're providing a compromise on both sides. Once these insurgencies believe that they have got what they want, why would they have a reason to come back in the future with another problem that they know is going to put them in trouble back again? They know they're going to come back with the scenarios going on. At this current moment, they're facing problems on both sides, by the government, by military funds, and even public funds. So what we're proposing is a solution to reduce weight, a solution to the never-ending conflict, and that is why we're proud to close. Thank you.
Good afternoon, judges, team opposition, and honorable audience. What an interesting debate it's been so far. First of all, while the topic is still hot, I'd like to point out that the opposition really likes to push the burden onto us. They keep thinking that it's our job, it's our responsibility to think of a solution. That's absolutely not true. We never said no compromise, we just said not this compromise. Yet, they still keep trying to push the problem onto us. It's not our job to find a solution, it's our job to refute this solution. However, despite that, we still gave a model. My second speaker still did give a model. Now, I'd like to say that Team Proposition used the example of the IRA, which is really interesting because this is actually against them. The IRA received a compromise with the Irish government on political terms. No land was involved in this negotiation. That helps us because it proves that land cannot be a viable argumenting source. The IRA did reach a solution, but it wasn't over land, which proves our point. Also, they gave a POI and they said that these groups already control the land. They do control the land, but by giving them this official legitimization, you're showing them and other insurgency groups that this is the correct thing to do. That you can use this method as leverage. You can push forward, you can acquire more land. That's what you're showing them. This is really not what we want. Also, they kept saying that, they kept saying, what is justified. That's not our burden to find what is justified. Our burden is only to refute this subject. Also, the insurgencies don't care about increasingly unjustified. They kept using the term increasingly unjustified. They're not bound by any moral laws that we're bound by. Yes?
Today we're not giving them land out of nowhere, right? They're already occupying that land. And what we do is we recognize them. And we told you that recognizing them makes them more accountable to international pressure because they are dependent on us in one way or another for revenue and some form of support.
Thank you.
This is the benefit.
Thank you. Right, it makes them more accountable. You're talking about an organization that has used violence against its people for decades. You make them more accountable by giving them more land, by giving them more power, by giving them more control over an area and over a people. Because that's absolutely absurd. I'd like to go back to something that the first speaker said. They admitted that insurgencies are violent, and they admitted that they need to get rid of these insurgencies because they are violent. Well, we're telling you, if they are violent and you're admitting that they are violent, then why should we give them land on which to operate? My second speaker used the example of the hedonic treadmill. When you give someone, any human, any organization, something, it's their natural human tendency to push that forward and push it to the point where they'll get more, because they realize that this is a solution. Yes?
So if that's the nature of every human, you just never negotiate with any person like ever?
You should negotiate with a person, of course you should, but not people that use these methods. We never said that negotiation is not an option. We said that negotiation over these terms and with these people is not an option. These people are using violence, they're using tactics that are extremely aggressive to get what they want. We should negotiate, not with these people. If you negotiate with these people, you support their ideologies and you support these ideologies for other organizations as well. Now I'd like to go over some of the points that we made. The first point is that we should not legitimize insurgency groups by negotiating with them or considering their interests. Like I said, these organizations are used to using violence to get what they want. Why should we negotiate with them? Why should we legitimize their tactics? Their tactics exist, we're not denying that. But why should we legitimize them? Why should we give them the power to be legitimate? If we do that, then we're supporting them and we're supporting other insurgencies to do the exact same thing. Yes?
We cannot be legitimizing their use of violence if the main condition we have as proposition is that they stop using violence and then ensure there's peace.
We're saying that of course they're supporting violence. Our solution is to diplomatically set them down. It's not to give them more leverage, it's not to give them more power to use violence in their own area. The second point was that this will not ensure long-term peace and sustainable peace. Do notice that the model that they gave is quite temporary. It's unlikely that these organizations will stand still while they've reached their goal. They're obviously going to want more expansion. So this is not a temporary solution. This is not a permanent solution. By providing a temporary solution, you're creating a permanent problem. And this problem is the extortive mindset that you created in the minds of other insurgencies and this insurgency. You're basically encouraging them to do this even more and more. Team Proposition has still not provided a justification and no guarantee as to why these insurgencies will stop when we give them the land. They provided no guarantee of that. Now back to my second point, which was that this will not ensure long-term peace and sustainable peace. Now, long-term peace and sustainable peace are two things that are different. Sustainable peace also needs to be reached for the insurgency and for this entire deal to be successful. That's not going to be reached. There's a couple of reasons. First of all, these insurgencies are used to using violence as a method of getting what they want. And they've used these for decades. They're not going to stop. This is all they know. They're not going to be able to diplomatically become successful after we give them the land. Also, think about all the people that live in that area. They still haven't provided a justification as to what we would do with those people. Those people, of course, what you're saying is that you're giving them more freedom to get out of that land. That's not freedom. What you're basically doing is you're giving them one option. Either be under the control of an organization that you do not like, be under the control of an organization that you do not agree with, or get out of your homeland. Notice that this is their homeland. This is where they have been all this time. It's unlikely that people of that land will leave just because there's an insurgency above them. So that'll be fueled for more conflict. And now I'd like to restate our model because the proposition seems to be so interested in us giving a solution. The first part of our model is better international laws on arms trade. The main problem here is that the insurgencies use violence to get what they want. We don't support that. And we got to show the world, and we got to show other insurgencies, and this insurgency, that this is not how they're going to succeed. That's the only way we can do it. Also, engagement in diplomatic activities to near international coalition against these groups. The more powerful nations we have on our side, in order to be able to set down these insurgencies, the closer we'll get to a solution that involves no violence and no further conflict. And the third part of the model is international consensus against these insurgencies. Thank you.
Good evening again, fellow judges, audience, Team Opposition, Team Proposition. I am the reply speaker for Team Opposition, and I'm going to be telling you why we won this debate. So, first of all, let me get to the clash point of this debate. First of all, it's terrorism versus insurgency groups. That was the first definitions, and I believe that the Team Opposition won this certain clash point because they contradicted themselves. The first speaker went up and gave his very own definition for it, and then in his same speech, within the same exact speech that he gave his own definitions for it, he contradicted himself. And he said that they caused civilian harm, which was pointed out by me and my first speaker, me as second speaker and my first speaker. So I believe that team opposition won that clash point. Next is governance. So a large part of this debate was about whether or not the insurgency groups have what it takes to govern themselves, whether they have what it takes to give people what they need, and we believe that we've made it the case that they do not have what it needs to. They don't have what it needs to make an effective or essentially like good government for the people. So it will cause, as I and my first speaker said, we rebutted this many times that they do not have a government, and the team proposition has given no single rebuttal towards that point and have given us no examples or anything of the sort. So again, people's willingness to accept insurgency groups. This is the emphasis of this debate. This is by far the most important clash point of the debate. The people themselves who are living in these lands. And throughout my first, second, and third speakers, we've all given more than sufficient evidence to suggest that these people living on this land will not accept it. From the South Sudan example to human psychology of the hedonic treadmill, we've given so many points that support this, and yet we have seen no reply from team proposition. So another thing is that if you look closely at team proposition's case, you'll see that they've given no evidence for their claims, especially their model, and no guarantee that it's worked in any historical past or has any means or guarantee of effectiveness. This is essentially the biggest flaw with their model. So, and allow me to allow me to state the points that have not been rebutted or are still standing. So, should not legitimize these insurgency groups by negotiating or considering their interests. This point has been largely untouched. It will not ensure long-term peace and long-term or sustainable peace. This point has not been rebutted by any of team proposition. Land governed by insurgencies is bound to be failure and leading to violence and not peace. This is one of the points that team proposition touched on, but they did touch on it in a very unwilling way, or as if they just wanted to move it along. And they gave very little rebuttal, and the rebuttal was basically, should we not discuss with them? And my third speaker gave an effective response to that, which was no, we will not submit to terror. It was the whole debate was basically these clash points and these standing arguments that team proposition has not rebutted. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to our debate, and I hope the judges will rule in favor of tomorrow.
So what's today's debate about, right? Because as proposition, we show you why our model, today's motion and our model is the best among the given alternatives, right? We tell you why often what governments do is make sure that they wipe out the movement entirely, right? And we see this principle put forward by opposition first people when they tell us, no, we never negotiate with terrorists. And we believe that that is why governments often try to wipe them out. And we told you why it puts even greater number of civilians at risk, because the conflict goes on, and as collateral, civilians always die. But then what do we hear from the second speaker, right? Because the second speaker comes up with this amazing idea that we can now enter into negotiations using coalitions, right? So we don't see why, what the difference is, right? So are they going to pacify these violent people who they portray are being so violent, will never listen to anything you say, and cannot be accountable, cannot be trusted? You're going to negotiate with them, right? So essentially the entire case of how how they're not accountable, how they're not predictable, and how they will always go against anything you try to say to them means that they have no other alternative to give to us other than to wipe them out. Because if they say that absolutely necessary that these insurgencies cannot be trusted on any level, it means that the only thing you can do is wipe them out. Which is why, from the first speaker itself, the proposition, we tell you the harms of doing so, right? We tell you the harms of drawing the conflict out and ensuring that it goes on for a longer time. We tell you that the civilians die during this, right? We tell you how these organizations only get stronger as the civilians see that there is no change in their lifestyle, right? The situation only becomes worse day by day, and this is exactly what makes insurgencies even more powerful. And today, we change this, and thus we're proud to propose, right? So what was our model today? What are we doing? These insurgencies already control populations and already control pieces of land. Only thing we're doing is persuading them to give up the violence and give up their arms in exchange for a permanent ceasefire, and giving them right to rule over and the freedom to make decisions regarding the land which they already have control over, right? The Taliban already controls major parts of Afghanistan. We're not creating a new country and giving it to them, right? They already control parts of that land. But what do we do on our side, right? We persuade them to give up the violence. And why is this effective? Because these insurgencies are built with a particular goal in mind, right? More often than not, they are from a marginalized community, right? Even in the case of the Philippines, right? Because they were Muslims that felt that the voice was not being heard by the government, that felt that the government is insensitive to their needs. So why is a model so effective? Because it gives them the freedom to exercise their identity and respects them, right? Which is why our model is so effective. It respects what they want, and this is the reason why they have such an incentive to stick to what they want to, right? We give them what they want, and we persuade them to give up violence in return for that. Which is why we believe on our side we make the situation better. So then what do we talk about, right? We tell you that there is a freedom to move out. That was the second part of our model. We tell that it is okay for the civilians to move out of there if they believe that they don't agree with the principles of the insurgency, right? So we believe this is necessary to understand the status quo, where these people are dying and going under worse situations, right? So in this case, it is necessary to understand that this pressure of people leaving is another reason why these insurgencies are likely to moderate themselves, right? We tell you why insurgencies always need a base support in order to stay relevant and in order to stay relevant in a conflict. We tell you that it is necessary to moderate themselves and to enter into these negotiations because violence becomes unjustified when you stand on our side. Violence and use of arms to put forward your own ideology becomes irrelevant and becomes obsolete on our side. And this is how we ensure that they will stick to the deal and they will stick to what they do they will. And they just tell us basic human psychology as a result of this. We don't really think that qualifies. So what do we tell you, right? We tell you it has already worked in the case of Chechnya, right? Where the leaders was given control of their own land, an autonomous region under the Russian central government. They were able to organize themselves and protect themselves, and they have been developing. We give you the case of Ireland because, as you know, they were already occupying this land. But when we recognize them, we believe that they are able to form a sufficient, an effective government and can ensure development and safety and security of its own people. We believe this is the only way in which to ensure that the conflict comes to a stop and ensure the civilians are to stop dying as they are able to develop themselves. And this is why we believe our model today is so strong. That's what proposition. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for his speech. This was a great debate. Please shake hands. We'll go. I think I'm with the results at the end.